To call this regular council meeting to order. Before I call for the roll call, I want to acknowledge that the land upon which this meeting is taking place and that all of us are collectively participating in is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Anishinaabe people. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you. So there are a couple of addenda this evening. The first is to remove report IS 28-2020 from our agenda. It will be dealt with at some other time. And the other relates to report PDS 31-2020, which is a significant change from the report that was initially published. This report now is an information report as opposed to a report that council would accept and approve the application. And there are some changes relative to the conditions of draft plan approval, which are being deleted in view of the fact this is an information report. So in Appendix 4 is now Appendix 3, and the conclusion of the report has been changed to reflect that we are receiving this for information purposes only. And all members of council should have received the addendum by email. And I presume, Madam Clerk, that that would have been published on our website?
Absolutely, your worship, yes.
Thank you. Just have a few announcements. And when I'm finished, I know that Councillor Butler would also like to make reference to the passing of a long-term business person and member of the Ridgeway BIA this past weekend. My first announcement relates to, unfortunately, again, the passing of one of our local volunteer firefighters, Bern Smith. He'd been a member of our local fire department, serving in Crystal Beach for the last 3.5 years, and his death is extremely untimely. It's a sad time for his family, his wife, Christina, his parents, Bill and Ellie. It's also a sad time for those firefighters with whom he served, to whom he was very well liked, very well respected, and his passing is also a loss to our community. So our condolences to Bern's family and friends. I wanted to make a reference to what I call the three main topics. It's going to be supplemented as well by a recent announcement today by the provincial government. The first is with respect to beaches. Town staff continues to monitor activity at all of the town's beaches, which is a constant topic of discussion during our emergency operations twice weekly meetings. Bylaw officers have responded to all calls received with respect to overcrowding and have ensured that beachgoers are not exceeding numbers in groups and are maintaining appropriate social distancing. Parking tickets have been issued where individuals have parked inappropriately at or near the beaches. Access, as we all know, to Bay Beach is controlled with security and maintenance staff on duty daily. While there have been some issues at other beaches, particularly the small section of beach to the west of Waterfront Park in Crystal Beach, the town and local police have continued to monitor that area. The part of the beach that is privately owned has been closed and is not available for use by the public. And the town has been in contact with the owner and is looking at long-term solutions to that situation. In the event problems arise or continue at any of the town's beaches, we will take further action to ensure the safety of our residents and those inclined to go to the beach for a day of leisure and recreation. I urge all those going to our beaches to be sensible, respectful of others, and follow the rules in place to protect you and those around you. Essentially, maintain physical distance, don't congregate in excessive numbers, wash your hands frequently, and most importantly, if you're not feeling well, don't go to the beach. The second item has to do with the Canada-United States border. Again, it's another hot topic in our community and all along the Canadian border. The current border restrictions imposed by the Canadian and American federal governments are in place until July 21st, 2020, which is a week from tomorrow. The Town of Fort Erie Council has urged our federal government to keep those restrictions in place until the U.S. has made progress similar to Canada in controlling COVID-19. The Ontario border mayors, of which I am a member, have urged the federal government in writing to maintain the border restrictions and have requested a virtual meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, to discuss the matter and provide her with our perspective, concerns, and suggestions regarding the issue. I want to make my position on the matter clear. The border restrictions should remain in place for as long as it takes the U.S. to get the pandemic under control. Currently, the situation is gravely worsening, with over 70,000 cases now being reported in the U.S. on a daily basis. Canada cannot afford to have the border opened to residents of a country that cannot agree on basic guidelines or take basic steps to protect themselves from a pandemic that has now caused over 500,000 deaths across the globe, including over 133,000 in the United States alone. With about 4% of the world's population, the US has nearly 25% of the COVID-19 cases worldwide. The border mayors are urging the federal government to continue exercise caution as border restrictions are eased, preferably in a phased approach with clear protocols to ensure the health and safety of our residents. I then wanted to briefly make reference to the fact that the provincial government today announced that the province will be moving to stage 3, and the initial counties or districts and regions which will be doing that are essentially those who were first allowed into stage 2. Niagara was, as you recall, in the second group of municipalities to move into stage 2, and it will be in the second group that will move into stage 3. So while some areas of the province are moving into stage 2 at the end of this week, likely Niagara will move into stage 3 at the end of next week or sometime next week. The new requirements with respect to stage 3 will permit indoor gathering limits to increase to a maximum of 50 people, outdoor gatherings to a maximum of 100 people. However, the gatherings are subject to physical distancing requirements, and the number of people that can be in your small social group will not exceed 10 for the time being. There will be restrictions. These are upper limits, so that depending on the facility, the maximum numbers may be less because there will be some correlation between size of the facility and the numbers of people that are permitted to gather. There will still be no reopening of things such as amusement parks and water parks, buffet style food services, dancing at restaurants or bars other than by performers hired by the establishment following specific requirements, overnight stays at camps for children, private karaoke rooms, and those types of things, including table games at casinos and programming establishments or gaming establishments. So that's where we're headed. And there's a lot of concern that we'll need to continue to maintain the requirements to, as I said before, maintain physical distancing. If you can't do that, wear a mask, wash your hands frequently, don't gather in large groups, just be sensible and respectful. That brings me to my final item. And this is becoming a hotter topic as the days go by. And I'm sure that all of the members of council, certainly the regional council, and I'm confident town council are receiving lots of advice and suggestions on how we should manage the issue of facial masks. I wanted to make some comments on that because I think it needs to be clear what at least my position is on this. On July the 8th, Regional Council debated whether to impose the mandatory wearing of facial masks or coverings in indoor enclosed public spaces. The matter has been deferred to the council meeting scheduled for July the 23rd. Members of Regional Council and Town Council have received a flood of emails and voice messages on the issue. Some in support, some opposed, some very thoughtful, some not so much. After considerable reflection, based on the information I've received, the comments I've received and solicited, my life experiences, and perhaps most importantly, my concern for the health and safety of the residents of Fort Erie and Niagara, I spoke in favor of making the wearing of facial masks mandatory in enclosed indoor public spaces at last week's regional council meeting. The reasons basically are these. Number one, most public health authorities everywhere, including Niagara's acting medical officer of health, acknowledge that wearing a facial mask or covering when physical distancing is not possible will help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Two, despite the best intention of business owners and their customers, physical distancing is often more aspirational than practical. Three, while Niagara and Fort Erie in particular has been very successful in containing the virus to date, almost all health professionals believe that we are not done with COVID-19 and a second wave is likely. Four, as the province moves forward in its efforts to open society, now moving into stage 3, there will be more and more opportunities for interaction between people. 5, if we do not persuade our residents that it is safe for them to go into businesses once the province moves into stage 3, people will simply choose to stay away, thus hampering our efforts to reactivate the economy. 6, research has shown that the virus can spread by asymptomatic individuals. 7, the incidence of cases among those between the ages of 20 and 30 is significantly on the rise. 8, wearing a mask does not protect the wearer so much as it provides protection to those whom the wearer comes in contact with. 9, a recent quick survey by the South Niagara Chambers of Commerce indicated that over 60% of business owners favor a mandatory mask policy. 10, many parents, those with compromised immune systems, the elderly, and those with elderly relatives are particularly concerned about contracting or spreading the virus to their loved ones. 11, recent research is revealing that there may be unanticipated side effects experienced by those who have suffered even mild infection of COVID-19. 12, the benefit of requiring everyone to wear a mask in confined quarters outweigh the disadvantages, in my opinion. 13, it is preferable to take action to prevent the potential for a rise in new cases rather than to react to one after the fact. 14, an informative education campaign with respect to various aspects of masks and facial coverings, how to wear them properly, where to obtain them, why it is appropriate to require them, and so forth, can be and should be part of any bylaw that may be passed by any municipality or region. 15, the mandatory requirement would be temporary and would be subject to a sunset clause. 15, if the choice is between prudence in protecting the health and safety of the residents of Fort Erie and Niagara, or taking a wait and see attitude with the risks attendant on that, I choose the former. I appreciate that there are those who disagree with my position and point to conflicting health advice regarding the efficacy of wearing a facial mask or covering in a time of contagious infection pandemic. There are those who maintain that their rights are being jeopardized. The reality is that in a democracy, the rights of each and every one of us are constrained by the rights of those around us. My obligation is to do what I believe best protects those I represent as an elected official. And that is the basis of my decision when it comes time for me to cast a vote or make a decision on this particular issue. Thank you for your patience all. I know that was lengthy. Councillor Butler, I'm going to go to you since we're still in the announcements stage.
Thank you. We experienced the untimely death of Brad Murphy this past weekend, and Brad was the president of Pacific Productions, who often used his company to promote our town in a very positive way that influenced people not only to visit, but to dine and to shop local, and also, I think, live here and migrate here. His contributions are many. He was a longtime Ridgeway BIA member. He was a mentor to many, and he was very important to members within our community. We thank him for his service, and we will miss him dearly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler, and I think we can all identify with Brad in the spirit of Christmas, something that he was always involved in and certainly took a great deal of pride in each and every December. Sad for him to go. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, then that takes us, there's a notice of upcoming public meetings with respect to a meeting at Town Line Road. That would be that's a rezoning application which is being deferred until such time as we can get better organized with respect to the public meeting, since we anticipate a large number of participants. I believe that will be dealt with in September of this year. We now have a couple of public meetings that we're going to be dealing with through our Zoom magic. And these aren't strictly Planning Act meetings, but they are public meetings nonetheless. And so we'll follow a similar process. The meetings are being live streamed on YouTube and are also recorded for public viewing on the town's website following the meeting. I presume, is that correct, Madam Clerk? Will they be recorded? Okay. To those members of the public who may be participating electronically in the public meeting portion of tonight's meeting, you may wish to put your view on gallery view by clicking the top corner, right corner from speaker view. I would also ask you to be mindful of background noise for the duration of the meeting, so that unless you're speaking, please have your device on mute. Please note that participating members of the public will remain in the virtual waiting room via telephone or electronically until such time as you are called upon by the staff member that is controlling access to the public meeting. As with all public meetings, we will be receiving information from a staff member, and that staff member then may be questioned by members of council if there are any questions that you have. Thereafter, the proponent may wish to address council, in which case they will be asked to do so, or a representative of the proponent. And thereafter, we will ask for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the application or opposed to the application. This is not, strictly speaking, as I had mentioned, a Planning Act public meeting, but it is a meeting that had been advertised, and so far we're proceeding forward with it. And there will be, as I understand it, no appeal with respect to the meeting itself. We will be dealing with the reports later on. Each meeting is the subject of a report for information purposes to council this evening, and will be dealt with this evening. So having said that, I will call for the first public meeting, which is relative to the draft plan of common elements condominium, South Coast Village Phase 3. And I would call upon Anamika Dilwaria to provide us with some background on this matter. Ms. Dilwaria.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be sharing my screen now. An application for a draft plan of common element condominium has been submitted by Mars Homes, Crystal Beach, Inc., the owner of the lands for South Coast Phase 3, located at 0-15199 Ridgeway Road. The purpose of this application is to permit common ownership of condominium road, landscaping, outdoor recreational area, clubhouse, and 48 visitor parking spaces to serve a 73-unit low-rise residential development. Notification of this public meeting was provided by placing a notice in the June 25th, 2020 edition of Fort Erie Post newspaper. Property owners within 120 meters of the subject area were also mailed a notice of the complete application and the public meeting on June 20th, 2020. This is an aerial photograph of the subject lands as well as the surrounding area. The subject lands are located in the Crystal Beach neighborhood and are approximately 2.5 hectares in size. The subject lands are located south of Ryan Avenue and east of Ridgeway Road. The proposed development will be accessed through two private roads, one accessed through Ridgeway Road and one through Ryan Avenue. To the north of the subject lands are located townhouses and single detached dwelling with frontage onto Ryan Avenue, and these were part of the South Coast Village Phase 1 development. To the south of the subject lands are located stormwater management pond, regional recycling facility, wastewater treatment plant, a future park, and some single detached dwellings. To the east of the subject lands are located single detached dwellings with frontage onto Ryan Avenue, and these were part of South Coast Village Phase 2. To the west are located single detached dwelling with fronting onto Ridgeway Road, and to the north along Erie Road are some commercial establishments. The subject lands are designated urban residential on Schedule A of the town's official plan. Section 4.7.4 of the official plan allows lands designated urban residential to be developed for a variety of housing forms such as single detached dwelling, duplex, semi-detached dwelling, townhouses, and multiple apartment dwellings. This proposal complies with the intent of the official plan. The subject lands are currently zoned residential multiple 1 RM1-649H zone in accordance with the zoning bylaw 12990 as amended by bylaw 38/2020. The holding provision in the bylaw is to ensure approval of the condominium agreement or site plan agreement. The proposed complies with the zoning regulations. The applicant must remove the holding provisions for the completion of site plan or condominium agreement. This site displays the natural heritage features located in the area. There are no natural heritage features located on the subject lands. This slide shows a development proposal. The applicant has submitted an application for a draft plan approval where the future homeowners within the proposed development will be a part of the common element condominium corporation with a shared condominium road, landscaping area, outdoor parking spaces, and outdoor recreational area, clubhouse, and 48 visitor parking spaces being the common elements. A common element condominium is a form of condominium which only has common elements and is used to tie parcels that are not part of this condominium to the common element parcels. The proposed development will also be subject to a site plan agreement. This slide shows the proposed site plan, which consists of 73 residential units with 20 stacked townhouses units, 18 bungalow townhouses units, 12 two-story units, and 19 two-story townhouses units. An open house meeting was held on June 22nd via Zoom and was attended by staff, applicant, and 8 area residents. The residents attended the meeting to obtain more information about the proposal. They requested more details regarding the condominium process, which was answered by the applicant's planner. One of the residents wanted to confirm if the owners of the properties on Ryan Avenue will have access to the proposed clubhouse. The owner confirmed if the residents who have bought the property from Mars Homes will have access to the clubhouse. Some residents expressed concerns regarding the poor maintenance of the beach located at the end of the Ridgeway Road, which they believed was owned by Mars Homes. The owner of the property confirmed that the beach property was not owned by Mars Homes. Since then, the town has issued work order on the property and the lands have since been cleaned. These are some of the pictures of the subject lands. This is an access to the subject lands from Ridge Road. And this is the picture of Ridge Road looking north. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dilwaria. Do any members of council have any questions of Ms. Dilwaria? Councillor Lubberts. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh,
There you
sorry
go.
about that. Yeah, just looking at the report that you got and just some comments that were made about the residents and the access to the clubhouse. I think I read somewhere where they said that access to the clubhouse would be available to the people on Ryan Avenue, but they will have to pay a membership fee.
That's correct.
You, Mr. Bishop, that was the information that was provided at the meeting.
And when I looked at the report, report says that this proposal is known as the South Coast Condominium Phase 3. Was that Phase 3 of the original plan of subdivision?
Ms. Dilwaria?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is phase 3 of the condominium that was done, and I believe it was done through subdivision plan, but maybe the Director of Planning would be able to provide some insight to that.
Ms. Dolch?
Yes, I can. Through you to the councillor. Yes, the subdivision was actually in 3 phases. So we had 2 phases in the first subdivision, one along Ridgeway Road and the other along the Erie Road extension through to Ryan was phase 2. And now the condominium would be phase 3 of the entire subdivision. The condominium was a block in that plan of subdivision. So it's now phase 3.
So I'm just curious, because if it's phase 3, then was it stated in the original draft plan that the people on Ryan Avenue wouldn't have access to the clubhouse?
Ms. Dolch, do you have any knowledge of that?
Through you to the councillor. No, the clubhouse was always private. There was never any indication that they would have access to it through that process, the subdivision process. It was always meant for those residents in that complex, in the South Coast Village complex.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yeah, the thing that's confusing me is why would this be phase 3 of the subdivision if there's exclusions to phase 1 and phase 2?
So in terms of the way it was structured, so the subdivision was obviously built out and weren't tied to part of the condominium yet. We still haven't obviously got to the condominium agreement space where that, the fees and the homeowner association fees can be established. So what they're saying is they would have to pay a membership fee in order to be a member of that facility now, because that condominium isn't attached to their dwelling units. So they wouldn't be paying into the upkeep and maintenance and other things that go along with that condominium. So that's why the membership fees now. If they would have established the condominium from the beginning, it may have been a different situation, but the subdivision came first before the condominium's in place.
Okay,
Councillor
all right,
Lubberts?
thanks.
Are there any other questions of Ms. Dilwaria? Then I'll ask if anyone on behalf of the proponent or the proponent wishes to address council.
Your Worship, I'll bring the agent in right now
Okay.
for the proponent. Mr. Fraser's just coming in now. You should be able to unmute yourself and share your video if you wish.
Good evening, Mr. Fraser.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Steve Fraser. I'm a registered professional planner with AJ Clark and Associates here on behalf of Mars Homes. I'm sure this committee is quite familiar with this particular project. We've gone through a number of Planning Act applications on this particular block, one being a recent rezoning amendment application that was approved in March, as well as we're currently going through a site plan control application that deals with the ultimate development of the property in terms of construction. We are very close to obtaining final site plan approval to enable construction to commence. What this application ultimately is going to achieve is the establishment of tenure or ownership for the property. So we're creating the elements as Anamika mentioned. We're creating the elements for the future common element condo, which would include the road, parking, the landscaping. None of the development or land use is part of this particular application. It is just, again, to establish tenure. Down the road, we will be submitting an application to remove part lot control on the property to create bottles for the parcels of tide land that will have an interest, an undivided interest into the condominium corporation. That will come down. Maybe just to Councillor Lubberts' questions, I could hopefully provide a little bit more clarification in addition to what Kira mentioned. So technically this block was in phase 2 of the subdivision. We only registered 2 phases, but as Kira alluded to, this has been referred to as the 3rd phase of development, is when this block is ultimately built out and the subdivision overall built out. Hopefully that clarifies that matter. The other was the membership fee for residents on Ryan Avenue. My understanding is Mars Homes offered the initial purchaser of those units the ability to purchase a membership to the clubhouse. However, once title is changed on those particular units, if the units were sold, that membership fee is no longer valid. So it'll only be, that clubhouse area will only be for the benefit of the future condominium corporation. So I hope that clarifies some of the items that were discussed earlier. I am more than happy to answer any questions of residents or council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Are there any members of council that have any questions? If there are none, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Then I'll, sorry, Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Just to follow up on the membership, you said, Mr. Fraser, you said Mars told the residents on Ryan Avenue originally that they could get membership, but now once the condominium units are sold, that membership is no longer valid?
No, what he said, Councillor Lubberts, is that the original purchasers of units in phase 1 and phase 2 were given the opportunity to purchase a membership once this clubhouse was built. As soon as those individuals sell their unit in phase 1 or phase 2, the successive owner will not be allowed to purchase a membership. Did I get that right, Mr. Fraser?
That is correct, Your Worship, exactly.
So if you're a condo owner, whether you're an original or a successor owner, you'll be paying the fees and the dues, and you'll be a member of the club.
Okay. Now there was also in the report, there was some comments about the beach down at the end of Ridgeway Road. And it was my understanding years ago when this project first took place that the Tennis and Yacht Club owned the beach, and they told the Mars people that they would grant access to the people that purchased property, that they would grant them the access to that beach.
Mr. Fraser, are you familiar with this?
Through the chair, yes, that's my understanding as well. And I think, I believe Anamika is doing a separate search to confirm exactly who owns the beach. But to Councillor Lubberts' point, that is my understanding as well, yes.
So, Mr. Fraser, just for your edification, the town has already done the search. We know who owns the land. We know what it consists of. And we've had discussions with the owner of the property who was issued an order to clean up the beach because of what occurred a couple of weeks ago. And the beach has been cleaned up. So it's not owned by Mars Homes. They have an easement of some sort to use the beach, but that easement is subject to the owner's desire to deal with the property. So that's where that stands, Councillor Lubberts.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Redekop, but that's not the point that I was trying to get at. Was my understanding that Ridgeway, the Tennis and Yacht Club, they gave they gave the access to the beach, but now I'm told that Tennis and Yacht Club doesn't own that property.
That's right, they don't. It's owned by a numbered corporation. And the principals behind the numbered corporation are in Toronto.
And that access rights still exists?
There's an easement on the property that is subject to termination in accordance with the terms set out in the easement agreement. So that the easement was granted to Mars Homes for use of people in the development.
And it's still valid today, even with the new ownership?
New ownership of,
Well, I'm assuming that Tennis and Yacht Club own the property. They're the ones that gave that gave the rights to use that beach originally.
that's not my understanding, but I can have, Ms. Dolch, do you have any further or clearer information on that right now?
Through you to the councillor. The original ownership of Crystal Beach Tennis and Yacht Club did own that portion of the beach. It didn't carry through with the actual development transfer of the board or the condominiums Tennis and Yacht Club Limited Group. It didn't continue with that ownership. It continued with the original.
So my question is, does the access to the beach, is it still there with the new owner?
There's an easement on title that would permit use by the members of the development, Mars Homes Development, is my understanding.
Now, it's my understanding also that the owner that has it now wants to sell it. Would those access rights continue on with the new owner?
Depends on the what happens with the easement.
What do you mean?
Well, a new owner could agree to continue with the easement, or my understanding is that the easement could be terminated by the owner if the owner wants to use it for other purposes.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions of Mr. Fraser? Sorry, Mr. Fraser, we're usurping your time. If there are none, then is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the application? And Mr. Butler, I'm going to rely upon you to advise us if that's the case.
So again, if you are here to speak on the application and you wish to speak in favor, now would be your time to raise your virtual hand. Your worship, I'm not seeing any hands raised in the attendee area.
And you have people that are in the waiting room right now?
Correct.
Okay, so it may be that there's some confusion as to the process. So why don't we ask anyone who wishes to speak to council to advise you so that they can address us if they wish to, either in favor or opposed, or just have questions.
Sure. So if there are any members of the public that wish to speak on this application, you can raise your virtual hand now. I'm still seeing none, your worship. It could be that they're here to speak to the next public meeting.
Okay. And what if they're unable to find how to get to their raised hand? Do they have some way to communicate with you?
We can bring them over. We can bring them in one at a time. There are only two. We can bring one in. We can see if they're here to speak to this item. If they're not, we can move them back to the attendee area.
All right. Why don't we do that just to be on the safe side?
So, your
So
worship,
can Ms. Christensen hear us?
yes, she can. And Ms. Christensen, if you unmute yourself or you wish to show your video, you can. It looks like you're unmuted now.
Yeah. No, a number of people asked me questions in the community, and I corresponded with Ms. Dilwaria, and I'm just listening out of interest. And essentially that's the reason for my participating. I don't know a great deal about the site other than that I walk through it every day, and proposed plan looks, consistent with the official plan, and based on the attractiveness of the existing community. I certainly don't have a problem. And the questions that were put to me were around height, and I was satisfied with the information I got, and this simply reinforces it. And I've also read some of the concerns about by the fire chief, and that certainly just from the plan, it looks as though it will be very tight in terms of security. But I would defer to the fire chief, who's a lot smarter than I am on that issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christensen. And it's unfortunate that we can't see you because we haven't seen you for a long time. And I know that
my hair's a lot. Yes, and it's funny because it looks like I'm supposed to be there. But anyway, yeah, my hair's a lot longer.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's nice to hear from you at least. Mr. Butler, who is the other individual?
So your worship, I'll move Ms. Christensen back to the attendee area. We
Okay.
have for Mr. Palumbo. I'm going to move Mr. Palumbo in. Again, he may be here to speak to the other application, but
Sure. Sure. We'll clarify that. Good evening, Mr. Palumbo. Can you hear us?
Mr. Palumbo, it looks like you are unmuted. You should be able to speak if you're here for this application.
If I may, Your Worship, I've spoken with Mr. Palumbo. He's for the next application for Bridgeview.
Okay, so then why don't we, that's great. So then why don't we conclude this meeting? If there's no one else in the waiting room, Mr. Butler, we'll conclude this meeting and then we'll move to the second public meeting.
Yep, that works. I'll move Mr. Palumbo back into the attendee area.
Okay, let him out of his box when it's time. All right, so then we're going to move then to the second public meeting, which is relative again to a draft plan of standard condominium. And this is on corner of Albany and King Street. Ms. Dilwaria again will address council and provide us with some background. We'll hear from the proponent or the proponent's agent if they wish to address us. And then we'll hear from, sounds like maybe Mr. Palumbo or anyone else who might tune in between now and then. So Ms. Dilwaria, you're back on. You have to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll share my screen now. An application for a draft plan of standard phased condominium has been submitted by 1639875 Ontario Limited, care of Frank Quay, the owner of the lands known as 0 Albany Street for Bridgeview Townhouse Phase 2. The purpose of this application is to permit 6 townhouse blocks containing 26 townhouse dwelling units. Notification of this public meeting was provided by placing a notice in June 25th, 2020 edition of Fort Erie Post newspaper. Property owners within 120 meters of the subject area were also mailed a notice of the complete application and the public meeting on June 20th, 2020. This is an aerial photograph of the subject lands as well as the surrounding area. The subject lands are approximately 0.79 hectares in area and are located north of Albany Street, east of King Street, and are located in the Gateway neighborhood area. The subject lands are currently vacant. The lands to the north were used for former commercial plaza. To the south are located single detached dwellings. To the east is an apartment building and a formal commercial plaza. and to the west are single detached dwellings. The subject lands are designated urban residential in town's official plan. Various residential uses are permitted within the urban residential designation, including townhouses and apartments. The Gateway Secondary Plan designates the subject lands as medium density residential. Medium density allows multi-unit dwellings like townhouses and apartments. The permitted density in a medium density designation is between 25 to 50 units a hectare. The proposed draft plan of standard condominium provides a density of approximately 33 units per hectare, which is consistent with the medium density designation. The lands are currently zoned residential multiple 1 RM1-594 zone in accordance with zoning bylaw 12990 as amended by bylaw 30/2018. The applicant has recently received approval from Committee of Adjustment to address the minor zoning deficiencies in the plan. It displays natural heritage features in the area. There are no natural heritage features located on the subject lands. This slide shows a development proposal. The plan of standard phased condominium will allow division of land into 6 blocks of lands, which would create 26 townhouse units, which would be owned separately. The plan will facilitate the sale of townhome dwelling units to be built on that. The private common road and 2 parking areas. The proposed development will also be subject to a site plan agreement. Our open house meeting was held on June 17, 2020 via Zoom. Staff, applicant, and were in attendance to this meeting, but none of the area resident attended this meeting. These are some of the pictures of the subject land and the surrounding area. This is the access to the site on Albany Street, looking north on Albany Street and looking south on Albany Street. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dilwari. Do any members of council have any questions of Ms. Dilwari with respect to this application? Just had a couple. I wonder if you could go to slide 6, Ms. Dilwari.
Sure. Give me a minute. Let me just go back to the presentation.
Sure. That's it. So it would appear that the parking for the 3 southerly blocks will all be directly from Albany Street. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
And then building F, that presumably is parking to the north?
The 2 parking area, one parking area is here and the other one is here. So this is the common parking area.
Okay, so
Or
that's...
landscaped area.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's hard to depict that from what was included in our thing. So there are no garages for, as an example, the buildings in block F?
It's my understanding that these units would have garages, Your Worship, and this is the visitor parking area.
Right, so there's adequate space between building F and building E for a car to actually get into the most westerly units?
Your Worship, there is a setback of 6 meters between the 2 units. So there is a sufficient space to get access to these garages here. And 6 meters would comply with the fire access code as well.
Okay. And then there's a further setback from the, I guess, the northerly edge of the block to the actual building itself.
Yes, Your Worship, there is a set between this building and the property line. There is a setback of 1.6 meters. Is that the question?
No. So to the right of where it says building F to the right, which is where the parking, I guess that's where the, so building F to the right. See where it says building F, the words right there. So that appears to be where the garage would be for the units in that block.
Yes, so through Your Worship, these bump outs, these are the garages.
Right. And there'll be a setback from that garage to the edge of the block. And the setback is 6 meters?
Yes, there is a setback of 6 meters there, yes.
And then there's a further setback between the two blocks of 6 meters?
That's correct.
So the shaded area between blocks F and E would be 6 meters.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions by members of council? And if you could go back to the full screen, Ms. Dilwaria, then I can see any other questions by members of council. If not, is there anyone on behalf of the developer who wishes to address council?
There is, your worship. I will bring in Mr. McGuffin from Monteith Brown Planning Consultants as a panelist. I'll bring you in right now, Mr. McGuffin.
Good evening, your worship, members of council.
Good evening.
Are you waiting for me?
We are, yes, you're
I
on.
apologize.
No, not at all.
Jay McGuffin, Principal Planner, Monteith Brown Planning Consultants, here acting on behalf of the owner and the owner's development relationship, Foxwood Developments London Inc. This represents phase 2 of their Bridgeview development. And I'm wondering, I have a rendered drawing on my desktop, your worship, if it may help to provide a bit of clarity to the questions that you were just running through on the draft plan of condominium, which at that reduced scale is very difficult to view. If it's possible to share my screen, I'd be pleased to share that with council.
Great. Your best, just don't interrupt our service to our residents.
So this is just a rendered version of the same plan that you are viewing. The pink buildings are the proposed buildings. The grayed out buildings to the top of the screen are the phase 1 buildings that were developed as street fronting townhomes. The application before you this evening deals with everything within the red line. You'll note that access point that was coming in off of Albany. You can see now the outlines and the dashed lines around what are the garages for each of the individual units, as well as the paved driveways of each unit in front, which would also serve for additional parking opportunities. And then you can see those additional visitor parking spaces, which are allocated in these 3 areas in this location that Anamika spoke of. And so I think this helps to illustrate more effectively the interrelationship of the building placements, their massing, and the relationship of the open space on the property. I can stop sharing if that's enough information, or I'd be pleased to answer any more questions.
That's very helpful, Mr. McGuffin. Are there any members of council have questions at this time? And again, I can't, let me just see. If you do, just raise your hand. If not. Okay, so it looks like there are no questions, Mr. McGuffin. Did you have anything further that you wanted to impart to us?
Just essentially that we are in agreement with the addendum report, the revisions made to the report, and the recommendations to receive the report and then work through some of the matters in the conditions that were put forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if there are no questions of Mr. McGuffin, I'll go to, if there's anyone who wishes to address council either in favor or opposed, or just to ask questions. Mr. Butler, it looks like we have one person in the waiting room.
Your worship, Mr. Palumbo has actually just left the meeting. So
Okay,
may
so
not-
his interest may have been the other, although Ms. Ms. Dewaria, you said that you had spoken to Mr. Palumbo and his interest was with respect to this?
Yes, yes, your worship, his interest was in this application. He said he's supportive of this application and he would be attending just to get information.
Okay, that's fine then. Is there anyone else then in the waiting area, Mr. Butler?
No, your worship.
All right, so that being the case, I'm going to call this public meeting closed, and we're going to move then to the consent agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to remove any of the reports from the consent agenda? I would remind you that IS 28, 2020 has been deleted. Did I get that right? Yes. Are there any others that anyone, Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Wanted to bring up IS 26, 2020.
Hey, we're not, do you want to deal with that? Do you want to deal with that separately, or did you just want to ask some questions about it?
Well, I don't want to remove it, I just have questions to ask.
Okay, so let's put it on the floor. You're going to put the package on the floor, the consent agenda?
Sure.
Okay. Please proceed with your questions on IS 26.
Okay, that's regarding the stone shouldering contract. Now, in the report, it talks about that they had a list of places, a list of streets that they wanted to do the shouldering on, and the price came in higher than what they wanted. And so they were, I guess there's about a 30,000, I'm using the term loosely, difference between what the awarded what the contract is asking for and what we wanted to get done. And I'm just wondering, I had a chance to talk to Mr. Murata earlier today about what is the purpose of doing the shouldering in the first place, and would we be prudent not to do all that was first indicated as opposed to cutting 30,000 from the roads? And I wonder if Mr. Murata can comment on the purpose of the stone shoulder.
Sure you can. Yeah, Mr. Murata.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. We do shouldering basically as a function of the structure of the road. So shouldering is primarily intended, or the shouldering work we do is primarily intended to help make the roads last longer. It's a form of maintenance that we do, and it helps keep them drier, allows the water to shed off, and in which case basically extends their life. So that is the intended purpose of this work we put forward.
Councillor Noyes?
So I would wonder if we should not proceed with the entire contract of around 100,000 as opposed to cutting it short. Like, I know our roads are so important to us, and I can't see the prices coming down for doing this. So I would not cut the road, the list. I would keep the list and go with the tendered price of the 100,000 something.
Mr. Jansen, where would the additional revenue come from?
To you, Mayor, this is an item that's included in our base levy budget. So I think if we were to look to expand it within this year, we'd either be looking at some capital reserve sources, such as our roads reserve in this case. We also have our 2019 surplus allocations with the annual report coming up in September. That's also another source of funding we could use at that time. But if there's something we'd be looking at right now, it would be our capital reserve, and I think in this case, likely the road reserve.
So, Mr. Murata, why would the recommendation be not to proceed with the tendered amount, but proceed with as much work as could be done with the amount budgeted?
The intention was to allow council the opportunity to discuss and then make a decision if they felt that it was a good idea. to do this, to do the full complement of work that we had intended to do, even though it was at a greater cost than we estimated.
So I'm assuming that staff discussed this before they came up with the report. And looking at this, looking at the report, I don't see your name on it, Mr. Murata. I see Mr. Stojanovic, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Cookett, and Mr. Chevalier. And was this discussed among Public Works or Infrastructure Services staff?
I believe that it was. I had a small conversation about this, but yeah, I believe it would have been discussed with Mr. Walsh and George and his crew at Gibson Center in the operations.
Is there some concern about the magnitude of the tender? Obviously, when staff speculated on what should be put in the budget, they were thinking in the range of 65,000. This has come out considerably higher. Is there an explanation for that?
The work that was originally put together, we aimed to follow minimum maintenance standards. So the work we were originally looking to do was to keep us in par with the minimum maintenance standards, basically that level of service.
I'm still formulating questions. I don't know, Councillor Noyes, did you have some further questions or comments?
Yes, under the alternatives, it does talk about the council has a second option of awarding the contract at the submitted bid amount, which would exceed, project being exceeded by 31,000. And again, in the last paragraph under that, it basically says council may wish, however, should council wish, council may instead choose to accept the bid as received and complete the project as tendered and exceed the projected budget by 31,000. So in there, kind of gives it to council's decision. I think it's kind of, the way I'm reading it is that they would like us to give them the 100,000 so that all the work can be completed, as opposed to then having to go back to the let's say the cutting floor and decide which roads aren't going to get done. So that's my perception of it. I would prefer to see all the work getting done as opposed to then having less of it, saving our roads a little bit longer.
So I'm not sure that that's an accurate capture of what staff is trying to tell us. We have received reports recently where there has been a tender that's exceeded budget, and we've been asked to come up with the additional funding, and staff hasn't hesitated to make that recommendation. That's not the recommendation in this report, and unfortunately, there's not a person who participated in the writing or the approval of this report that's available this evening. And Mr. Jansen, this would have been discussed at senior managers meeting, I presume, but I don't know whether you folks would have gotten into the issue of why not 104,000 instead of the budgeted 65.
Yeah, no, we did not discuss the overage explicitly, but I think you make a good observation that staff were prepared to adjust the contract for the budgeted amount. It's something certainly we can look at in future years. And this is a year that has its own financial challenges, and I haven't looked the long-term forecasting of that reserve, but I know that we do try and keep the capital reserves for capital works, and this is an annual maintenance program. So I would be suggesting we keep this amount as presented tonight, and it'd be something we consider in the future.
So, Mr. Murata, what, obviously there's some merit in trying to prolong the life of our infrastructure, and I understand that this is a mechanism, as you mentioned, to protect the structure of the roads. What if this were put over for a week and a determination on this report was made at next week's council meeting? Does a week delay cause a concern for you with respect to this project?
Oh, we could manage a week. That's fine.
Okay, so I'm offering that to members of council if they want to put this over to the meeting next Monday, which is July the 20th, when we can hear from one or more of the authors and approvers of the report. Councillor Lubberts? Okay, you're on mute, but I think you're saying that you would move to defer this for 1 week.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, are there any questions or comments with respect to the timing of that? Because it's a motion to defer. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Okay, so we're back to the consent agenda. Are there any other questions that any members have? Councillor Noyes, you still have the floor, and then I'll go to Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, did you want me to go through all the questions I have on the different ones? Or just
Yeah, why don't we do that? Yeah.
Okay. The IS 28-2020, the Town of Erie administrative thing, the single source purchase.
So that's no longer on the
Oh,
agenda.
no,
That-
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the one. My numbers are weird. Let's see, okay, the 28-2020, right? Well, that's when that's off.
28-2020 is
Okay, so
on.
27-2020, the
Right.
asset management plan.
Right.
Okay, just that there's a lot of work, there's a lot of additional work, particularly with data entry and correlation of the information. I had a chance to talk to Mr. Murata. He indicates that, yes, there's a lot of work that the government always wants for all these stats and things. But I understand there is no, at this point, they're not anticipating any staffing increase. And I didn't know if Mr. Murata wanted to comment on that. There may be some in the future, but not right now.
Mr. Murata?
That's through you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. We have the staffing resources right now to do the work we're doing. We do have some consulting help that comes in and participates with the data and managing the data and bringing the data into our systems. So at this point in time, we don't see that need for additional staff, but that's something we'll certainly keep an eye on as the asset management plan continues to grow and evolve.
Councillor Noyes?
So the other report was number numbers driving crazy. The Point Avenue pumping station, IS 29-2020.
Right.
Just again, that I understand this is a problem area with all the flooding and the high winds and everything else we have in that area. But I do know that we're also having a town ditching review. And is the town ditching review where we're looking at all the different ditching areas, is that also going to be part of this, or is this going to be added to it, or is it separate from? Because in the
I think
report,
it's, yeah, I think they're two separate projects, but Mr. Murata, you're the engineer.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. They are separate. This one that we're looking at is very specific location. We know from history and from past work where this pump station, what lands it drains, and those would be the ditches that we'd be looking at, just making sure we can get the flow to the station, and then of course the flow from there out into the lake. It will be similar to other studies that we've done, but it will be resting and sitting on its own.
thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. Just out of curiosity, I'm looking at page 3 and page 6 of the report. On page 3 of the report.
Which report, Councillor Lubberts?
IS 29.
Okay.
And on page 3, it's the pre-design concepts. It says that it's anticipated the design concepts will be for precipitation-related surface drainage only and not flood mitigation. But then on page 6, it said existing service level must be reviewed to ensure any renewal work provides an acceptable level of service and resiliency to high lake levels. Well, it's the high lake levels that are causing the flooding. So, but in page 3, it says we're only dealing with rainwater. So I just need an explanation of what are we doing here? Are we
Murata.
trying to mitigate flooding?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. The resiliency part that we're looking at is the station itself. We want to make sure if the concepts come forward that we're going to need a new station or improvements to the existing station, we want to make sure that high lake levels aren't going to impact that station. We're also looking at the discharge piping. So we want to make sure that that pipe can get itself out into the lake in a good area. We find with the lake levels that the sand can affect the outlet pipe. It's caused trouble in the past. So we want to kind of examine how that station can be resilient against things like that, just to make sure that we don't build something that's then going to suffer from those high lake levels. So I understand what you're saying. We know that the high lake levels can cause problems in that area for flooding, but what we're talking about in terms of resiliency here is related specifically to this station and how it can function in the future, as we know the lake levels rise and fall on a cycle.
All right, so the pumping station is not going to be there to help with the flooding. That's just going to be for runoff water.
Mr. Murata, that's not what I heard.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The runoff is going to be coming down Point Abano Road South. So we know the area of the land that it drains now, and that's what we intend to do. So it's going to operate as a storm system. It's going to rain, the water runs off of the properties, the roads into the ditches through the station and then pumped up and out into the lake.
Yeah, so in other words, you just want to protect the pump from flooding, not the land around the pump area.
Mr. Murata?
You, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. We want to protect that station from the high lake levels, create some resiliency within it for that reason.
All right, okay. All right, thanks.
So, Mr. Murata, just for clarification, how do you protect the pumping station from flooding if you're not protecting the area around it from flooding?
The station can be built in a location that's less prone to flooding. We know down in that area where the high water levels are coming at now, we understand that information. So as we go through this exercise in terms of locating it, that could be something that we want to consider, whether it's in an area of high groundwater or not as high groundwater. These are some things that we can look at and we want to examine so that when we do come up with the final product, it's going to operate at the best of its ability without having these other impacts coming in and causing it to be less effective.
Councillor Lubberts, did you have any other questions?
No, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that had any questions with respect to the reports in the consent agenda? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the reports and recommendations? None opposed. That is carried. That then takes us over to Planning and Development Services and Councillor Zanko. You are the chair, I believe.
Mayor Redekop,
Sorry.
that consent agenda, do we have to approve that as
Question?
amended?
I'm sorry.
We have to what?
We have to approve the consent agenda as amended. Did we not remove something?
We did remove something and we've approved everything else. We just voted on what was
As
left.
amended, right?
What was left. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Okay. Okay, can we now move on to Planning and Development Services?
Yes,
And Councillor Zanko, you're on.
that is me. Thank you. Planning Development Services is now in session. We do not have any presentations or delegations this evening. We do have report PDF 30-2020 proposed draft plan of common elements condominium. Can I get a mover?
So moved.
Councillor Butler, are there any comments or questions with regard to this report? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. Our next report is PDF 31, 2020, proposed draft plan of standard condominium Ridgeview townhouses phase 2. Can I get a mover? Councillor Lubberts. That is on the floor. Are there any comments or questions? Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that this is the recommendations as contained in the addendum, because it's quite significantly different than what was in our package. So this is a report for information purposes only, and we will be hearing further back from staff following tonight's public meeting.
That's correct. Do you have any other comments or questions, Your Worship?
No.
Okay, does any other member of council have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? That report carries. That brings us to PDF 32, 2020, Award of Consulting Services for the Town of Fort Erie Employment Land Expansion Study. Can I get a mover?
So moved.
Mayor Redekop, are there any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. It's in regards to the 40 hectares and just some clarification. Before, we weren't sure whether we would have the region was only recognizing it as a one-time increase of the 40 hectares, or if we could do it 40 hectares in different places, or if we could take that 40 hectares and divide it up and put 20 here and 20 there. Did we get any clarification from the region what their interpretation is from the province?
Ms. Dolch, can you answer that?
Through you to the councillor. Yes, so it's dependent on your numbers of need. So in our case, the Hempson study that was done on behalf of the region kind of identified us as about 32 hectares of land. We can do some land swapping as well. So we may be able to reach 40 hectares. We may be able to reach 45, but it's not a one-time, it's just based on needs. So they have clarified if you show a need of 80 hectares, you could potentially look at 2 urban boundary expansions, but they do like them adjacent to existing urban areas.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. Does any member of council have any business, new business or inquiries? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if we could hear from the director with respect to bylaw and being able to get bylaw to maybe monitor the situation on the pathways, because there are a lot of motorized vehicles, especially the use of mopeds. And I've been receiving a lot of complaints with respect to little kids having to dodge kind of out of the way as they're riding in that pathway.
Ms. Dolch, is the pathway or sidewalks? Are we talking about the Friendship Trail or sidewalk?
Friendship Trail, yes.
Friendship Trail. Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, yes, I can have somebody look in that. Is there a specific area that people are noticing more motorized traffic?
From Waverly Beach all the way down to the core center of downtown Ridgeway. There seems to be a group of them. I did speak to one gentleman and he was very defiant and didn't really care. So unfortunately.
Okay, I will have somebody look into that and monitor that situation a bit better.
Thank you.
Are there any others? Councillor Noyes.
Just a clarification on that. Are mopeds even allowed on the Friendship Trail? They're not considered an assistive device, are they?
Ms. Dolch?
Through to the councillor, motorized vehicles aren't permitted on the Friendship Trail.
Anything further, Councillor Noyes?
No. No.
Okay. Any other? Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. We got an inter-office memorandum from Signe Hansen about the road allowances along our shoreline, particularly Windmill Point and Burley. And I'm just wondering if staff is going to bring forward a report on some recommendations that council might want to consider. One being poles, marking poles that we have at other road allowances to show the property lines. I don't think all our road allowances are done. And if they're going to bring anything forward on Burley and Windmill Point.
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, my understanding is the CAO, Mr. Cookett, has requested Mr. Hutton order some signs for to delineate the beachfront, the public land areas. So those are supposed to go in the majority of the beachfront areas, and especially in those two you've mentioned.
Are we going to put the property line poles up like we've done in other areas? The red and white poles, I don't know, they're about 1.25 inches or 1.8 inches diameter. Are we going to put them up as well?
At this point in time, my understanding is we're just putting up signs to kind of delineate where the public property ends on either side of the poles.
All right, okay. I'll bring something forward later then.
Okay, anything further, Councillor Lubberts?
No, that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Butler?
Just to add to Councillor Lubberts' question, on Windmill Point, there are delineating markers in red and white right down to the waterway to distinguish the private property to the public property. So Windmill Point does have that.
Okay, Ms. Dolch?
And if I could just elaborate, Ms. Hanson's just advised me they're in both locations, those poles in those instances, in those beaches you've mentioned.
Okay, anything further, Councillor Butler? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Noyes and then I'll go back to you, Councillor Lubberts.
When we were talking about the row allowances to the beach, I was thinking about the correspondence we've had on regarding, I think it's called Raver Avenue, and the problem with the fence being put up there by over the road allowances have been taken down. Is how are we going to, I know it's down. Are we going to be doing anything with that road allowance to not let the owners on either side put up a fence again? Is there, we're going to take any action or do anything regarding this?
Mayor Redekop, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, my understanding was it wasn't the neighbors on either side that had put up the fence. It was someone from further down who somehow had the mistaken belief that they could somehow obstruct that. But that's the point that you raise about advertising that as an access to the lake is something that I'm pretty sure the neighbors aren't too fussy about. They like the idea of it not being advertised, but I do believe that that's something that should be, that Ms. Hanson should be looking at, because it is a waterfront road allowance.
Anything further, Councillor Noyes?
No, I think the mayor said it very well.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lubberts? Councillor Lubberts, did you still have a comment?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
He's frozen.
Am I still there?
Yeah, you're still there. You're just freezing up a bit.
With you. I'm getting notices on my computer that my internet connection's not good.
The sky's pretty black, so.
Is there everybody here?
No.
No, you sound perfectly normal to me.
Everybody hearing me?
Not very well.
Why don't we do this? If your connection improves, we can always come back to you. So why don't we do that
Okay.
before the end of the meeting?
Yeah. I just, I don't know but.
Yeah, we'll have
If
to
it
come back to you,
improves.
Councillor Richard. We can't hear you. Oh, and maybe you've come back now. I can see you moving. Did you want to try again?
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to, I understand that there are some delineation marks and the property line poles at road allowance locations, but there's several in town that are not marked. My question was, are we going to mark the other ones as well? And we get reports, and we have nothing but problems with road allowances, but when it comes to marking them and staking them out and putting our property line markers up, we seem to only do it whenever there's a problem with that particular road allowance. Now we got a problem on Graver. We don't have one down at the bottom of Ridgeway Road. And there's others that aren't marked as well. And so is staff planning on putting those markers on all of our road allowances, not just the trouble areas?
Hey, Ms. Dolch, do you want to maybe talk to Ms. Hanson about that, or did you want to comment on that now?
I will need to reach back out to Ms. Hanson, and we can get back to you either through email or if this is counseling prayer, we can send it through on a pink sheet to advise.
Okay.
I think the latter would be
Anything further?
appropriate. I think
Yeah.
the latter would be appropriate, something formal so that it can be referred to at the next council meeting.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Lubberts, did you have anything further?
No, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, are there any other items of new business or inquiries? Seeing none, are there any questions with the business status report? I don't see any hands up, so I will hand the floor back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zanko. That then takes us to infrastructure services, and I may be a little off on this. Is Councillor Noyes the chair? Yes. Please proceed.
Infrastructure Services is now in session. There are no presentations and delegations. That brings us to report number IS 10-2020. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Mr. McDermott, Councilor McDermott. That is,
Point of order, Madam Chair, it's already been moved. It was moved on March the 9th.
okay.
So what we need to do is regard the memo that was circulated with our agenda. And because the region has withdrawn, the recommendation is that we defeat this recommendation, this report.
Okay. So don't we have to put it on the floor first?
It's already on the floor.
Oh, from
It was
before. Okay.
From before, yes.
Okay, so then we are going to, I'm sorry, the next thing I do then is we're going to defeat it.
You can ask for questions or comments.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, any comments or questions, knowing that it's going to be removed? Okay, so that brings us then to,
We have to vote on it.
yeah, I know we have to vote on, but when do I ask a question about now that the region has removed it, who's going to pay for the work done today on the engineers?
It's that question right now.
Okay, I have a question. Now that it's going to be defeated because the region has pulled out, there's been some costs associated with how far we've gone already with the engineer's report. Who is going to absorb those costs? Who's responsible for them?
So the memo indicates, Madam Chair, that the costs will be absorbed by the petitioner, and my understanding is the petitioner was the region. Is that correct, Mr. Murata?
Yes, that is.
And do we know if the work in regards to the need for improved drainage, is that going to be somehow incorporated in the road reconstruction, which was one of the suggestions when we had the public meeting? When we had the meeting regarding the drainage, they were talking about incorporating it into the road reconstruction with, I think, storm sewer drainage and things like that. Do we know if that's going to be part of the plan as the region moves forward on the road?
Yes, that is the plan. That's what the region intends to do moving forward with their project.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we vote. All those in favor of the report? Seeing none, all those against? The report is defeated. That brings us to new business inquiries. Do we have any new business inquiries under infrastructure? I have one. Oh, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wondered if for the next meeting, we could get an update with respect to the Bernard Beach cover that was going to go over the culvert.
Mr. Murata?
Yes, we can look into that and get back to you and give you an update report on it. I don't have anything with me now, or I'd share it, but yeah, I do remember this. We'll look into it.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? I have one regarding Nye Road. I know that we had it. We had a report that came to us about at the last meeting in regards to the engineering work, I think, for the for Nye Road and the outlet, or anyway, there's a fair amount of engineering work required, and we did pass. We did, I think, approve the budget, but I don't know if we actually have an engineer's report. I don't know if we assigned an engineer yet. And I'm just wondering if we can get more information on the background of how we got to this point. Again, I'm concerned about the amount of money that the project is estimated to cost, over $1.6 million, and we're looking at only 19 homes. I had the opportunity of driving down Nye Road this morning, and it's not in horrible shape. I would say if I was to rate it, I would rate it a B. There's a lot more roads a lot worse than Nye Road in town. So I'm just wondering, it was scheduled for 2026. 2 weeks ago, we approved some funding for an engineer's report, and I'm not quite sure how I'm missing something in here. What's happened between, 19 homes? Why are we going to this great expense? I know there was an OMB hearing. I know there were some requirements from the OMB, but it was supposed to be borne by the developer. So I just need some more background on this. Mayor Redekop?
So, Madam Chair, you're the chair of Infrastructure Services. I'm not sure when your next business subcommittee meeting is. This is an issue that you could raise at that. But right now, the recommendation that we approved on June the 15th was to amend the 2020 capital budget to permit design work. I would suggest if you want to change that, you'd have to move to reconsider that decision. But in the meantime, if there is a business subcommittee meeting, perhaps you could discuss that with the staff, get some background, and then decide whether you want to move to reconsider.
Okay, and thank you for that information. We don't have a meeting coming up, I don't think, for quite some time.
When is Mr. Walsh back, Mr. Murata? Is it next week?
Yes, he's back on Monday.
So perhaps you could advise him that Infrastructure Services should have a business subcommittee meeting before the end of July. Where are we now? July the 13th? Perhaps around the end of July or thereabouts, if possible, because I'm sure there are other issues that could be addressed.
And I thank you for that. The other thing, while I was driving down Nye Road, there's a lot of curves in that, and the one sign that basically says that there's a sharp turn is actually obscured by bushes. It's really hard to see that you have to make a very sharp right angle. You can see part of the checkered sign, but most of the checkered sign is totally obscured by the bushes. So that may be one to be addressed. The other thing I wanted to bring up is River Trail. River Trail has now had its second application, and I had a chance to talk to Mr. Marina, and I'm sure he's going to go look, here one of his partners will be going and looking at River Trail to look at the condition of the road. I do have some concerns. There's still a lot of loose gravel. There were some diesel spills on it. There was one area where a manhole cover is totally covered, like totally covered. They just kind of went over it. There's a few other things that I brought up with Mr. Murata, but I just wanted to keep council abreast that, River Trail has been a road that's had many challenges in the last few years. I want to make sure that it's done to a condition that we all can be very proud of. And right now, I think there's still some issues with what's been done. Any other questions or comments? Okay, that brings us to the business status report. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, infrastructure services is now closed.
Thank you very much. Yep. Thank you very much, Councillor Noyes. That takes us to corporate and community services. Councillor McDermott.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Unmute here.
You're good. Now you're on mute.
Am I okay now?
You're okay.
Okay. So we have no presentations and delegations. We have no reports or any new business inquiries. Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I'm concerned a little bit about the charities and us not having bingos and things like that. And a lot of the charities a lot of their income that they fund their programs with are based on bingo funds. It's been a considerable time since they've been able to raise money. And not only are their bingo funds drying up, their places many times are closed because they can't do anything. They can't have meetings, they can't fundraise and things like that. So I was concerned about what we're doing in regards to the bingo allocations. And I had an opportunity of emailing Miss Grace Grass. And she was kind enough to respond to me quite quickly. And I wonder if I could read what she said. What I was asking her is, how are the different organizations affected by the COVID-19? Obviously, some charities are not as affected as others. For instance, if you have a hockey or skating, you're not renting the ice, so you don't have that expense. And other charities have fixed costs that the COVID-19 actually increases, but definitely doesn't decrease. And how is this going to be reflected in the allocations on bingo as they go forward once it resumes? So if I may, she basically, I'll read her email to me. We are working on a COVID restart plan, prioritizing organizations that provide essential services versus those that do not. Those would be organizations that provide counseling services, example, Canadian Mental Health, organizations that provide food services, example, Meals on Wheels, organizations that use lottery funds to pay utilities like the Black Creek Community Center, and organizations that provide services and programs to specific individuals. The Brain Injury Association. For the first 6 weeks that the OLG and OCGA have given the direction that when the gaming centers open, no volunteers will be present. They still, however, will receive their share based on the number of assignments that they have been given. Every effort will be made to ensure that organizations in need will receive funding quickly while still following a fair and equitable approach. The board meeting will be held as soon as a firm date can be set for Niagara to enter into stage 3. And then they'll be having a meeting. And I guess my question for council is that should we not have a good idea of exactly which charities are being affected? What's the allocation? Like I said, if their allocation was for 100,000 and now, and they're missing 70,000, I would like to know that as a councillor, how these different organizations are being affected, specifically in regards to their allocations and what they did get, because all these organizations have different year ends. So if your year end was in March 1st, for last year you didn't have any, like you had your full allotment to bring you forward. But if your year end was, let's say September, October, you're going to be affected differently. I would just like to have a better handle on exactly how the different organizations are being allocated and where their money, like what level they're at. And as we create the Fort Erie policy for gaming that they're supposed to be following. And I'm not quite sure how the pie chart that council first created about, 20% for this, 10% for that, charity, poverty, all those different things, children's programs. If we need to look again at that pie chart to see if we want to change the chart at all. with the understanding of COVID-19. I do know that the government has given money to some charitable organizations, but through the United Way, I think is their primary. And they're basically, the United Way is looking at, food banks, different programs in regards to food and shelter. And I'm not sure whether that is going to help all our charitable organizations. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm getting calls from some of the organizations that are saying, we're on our last legs. We really don't know what to do. We really don't know what to expect. And I just think we need to somehow get a better idea of what's going on and how stretched some of them are. And I don't know if I'm making myself clear here, but it's some are on their last legs, and I don't know what to tell them. And I don't know.
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer at this point, because I know that gaming has yet to formulate their plan for things moving forward. But I understand what you're saying, because many of the groups that I assist with are feeling the exact same way. Some of them are sitting there with empty bank accounts because they're all relying on the gaming money. So I don't know if we should possibly ask Ms. Grass, be a little easier. Councillor Dubanow was here tonight.
Yeah.
1 second. Jonathan's got his hand up, so maybe he has an answer. Jonathan?
No, I would just say that, the board, like you said, the board is planning to meet and to look at a plan and to approve some allocations for this type of thing. If you are receiving those types of concerns and questions from organizations that are members of gaming plans, I encourage you to have them call Grace and speak with her. The board is going to be looking at this, and I know we don't have Councillor Dubanow here tonight as well, but can bring forward some of these concerns to that group as well. There are some programs that the other levels of government have created that do assist charities. So, and some of those are available on the Canadian website. One of them is to deal with cash flow with interest-free loans. So, do encourage those organizations to look up any and all supports for Canadian charities. There's not too many, but whatever there is, we encourage them to take advantage of those. But do have them contact our gaming board as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. Your worship?
Yeah, Jonathan, are you in Councillor Lubberts' basement? Because we're having trouble hearing you as well. I think it would be helpful. I think all of the members of council are interested in this issue and concerned about this issue. So I think it would be helpful if Mr. Jansen were to provide us with some background information on where we could steer some of these nonprofits or charities if there is assistance from other levels of government, number one. And number two, Councillor Noyes, it would be very helpful if you could list the concerns that you have, pass those on to Mr. Cookett, who can then deal with the Secretary of the Gaming Corporation, Ms. Grass, to see if we can get some comprehensive response to the concerns and see if there's something that we as a council can do to assist the situation. It is difficult since the board hasn't been able to meet for the last little while, but these are all issues that perhaps we can help to kickstart once the time is right. So if you could do that, that would be helpful as well.
I will. I have nothing.
Councillor Noyes?
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Your worship, I didn't catch the primo this afternoon. Were the bingo halls included in that opening of phase 3?
You know what? I don't think they are, but just hold on a second. I didn't get the impression they were, but they might be, because casinos, I think, were open. So could very well be that they are. The clerk may have some, I'm just looking at, or Mr. Jansen does.
Yes, they were included with that. I think there were some specific exemptions for table games, things like that, but we would expect our bingo halls to open with stage 3.
With limited capacity, though.
Oh.
I think I don't think they're going to be, they're not going to be open, I don't think, for full capacity.
Right. Councillor Noyes?
In the memo that I got back from Ms. Gress, she's actually talking about the board meeting will be held as soon as the firm date has been set for Niagara to enter into stage 3. So I'm making an assumption from that. She's thinking that the bingos aren't going to be going until stage 3. Because she did talk
Right.
about it.
That's right, stage 3, and we're not going to be there yet this week, but perhaps the latter part of next week.
And, okay, thank you.
And I would be pretty much certain as soon as they get that okey dokey that they're gonna be right on it. So, we'll keep on top of that. Any other questions? Are there any questions on the business status report? Seeing none, give back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lubberts. That takes us to scheduling of meetings, and I just checked my calendar. There is an IS meeting scheduled for July the 29th at 5 o'clock. So that's a time when, Councillor Noyes, you could delve into your concern about the Nye Road issue.
Okay, thank
Are
you.
there any other meetings that anyone wishes to announce? On Tuesday, July the 21st, I will be signing with the executive director of the Native Friendship Center, Jennifer Dockstader, an Indigenous reconciliation declaration, which will be part of the program of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, which has entered into an agreement with all of the Native Friendship Centers. And I think FCM is also involved in that. That's July the 21st. Are there any other meetings that anyone has that they wish to announce? Councillor Noyes?
Mayor Redekop, I'm looking at my schedule on Wednesday, July 29th, and I don't have it.
So either that's something that's been canceled, or they didn't, there was a, let me see. I wonder if that was sent out prior to the change of councillors.
Your worship, it was sent out prior to changing the chairs.
Right. So, Madam Clerk, can you make sure that the new council representatives on that committee receive notification of that meeting? That's on July the 29th.
Yes, Your Worship, I will.
Thank you. I suppose you can do that by simply contacting Jennifer, Executive Assistant to Mr. Walsh. Any other meetings? If there are none, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that we have one as well on Wednesday, the 29th at 2:30 for the Corporate and Community Services Subcommittee meeting.
That is correct, you do. Any other meetings? If not, then in the absence of Councillor Dubanow, that doesn't mean we can't adjourn the meeting. It just means someone else will have to take up the responsibility. Councillor McDermott, I can't think of a better person. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn this meeting? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.